crown and the mask. It does look like a little bit, kind of like a monkey to me. I don't know why. Like the little ears kind of, but yeah. And then this is the back. Okay, so the reason I'm showing the back, and we're nearing kind of the end of the presentation here, but there's just a few little things, I guess. My mother always was a very big stickler to having perfect stitches, and the way that she would assess our abilities is by looking at the back. She would never look at the front. She would always pick it up and look at the back. Fida, she doesn't hate me saying that, hers was a mess, okay? I mean, now she does it and they look great, and she's perfected this skill to the max. But she wouldn't do her threads, her stitches in a row. She wouldn't count them. She would kind of just like do a few and then jump to the other part and do another. And so in the back, it would just be all this big jumbled mess, right? For me, I just did them in rows because I was a little bit of a linear thinker, and I just was like, you know, it was easy for me that way. And the reason this is important, actually, and the reason that I'm trying to call it out to you for anybody who's trying to learn embroidery and who wants to know something that I didn't read from a book, I learned from my mother, is that you want to reach this level. You want to have neat stitches on the back. You want to be able, what my mother would say, is see which design you've embroidered from the back. You should know by looking at the back what design you embroidered. And the reason for this is because when you're making a dress or a garment and you're putting it on, and you have jewelry on or your earrings, whatever, it could get caught. It could destroy the back of the dress if you don't put a lining in it and you're just kind of putting it on. It could really destroy the dress. Yeah. So that's really important as well. But then also, what's even more important is that over time, if the dress is aging and the threads are kind of falling, disintegrating, or something gets caught on it and cuts it, you're going to have to go in and restitch that section, right? Well, imagine if this section starts here, goes here, comes back here, goes here, comes back here, goes here, comes back here. You will not just undo this section, you'll have to undo this section, and this section, and this section, and this section, just because there was one tear here, right? So it helps you preserve the dress longer if you pay attention to the back of the embroidery. But that's just something, those like little tips, you know, you learn while learning from somebody else, you wouldn't pick up in a book. This is another Cleopatra dress I found in my research, and this is how it would look like. I mean, you know, there are variations, like depending on the village and the family and all of that, but I just thought that was really beautiful. And does anyone know which part of the dress this is?
The back.
Yes, exactly. It's the back, bottom, bridge area. And that's the pattern we created. We actually just tried to create, if we didn't have the pattern for the design and, you know, to share, we created it for the book. Like, we want to make sure that these patterns stay alive, and I know it kind of puts us at risk a little bit that just any factory could probably pick these up, but I'm sending these out to my Palestinian brothers and sisters. I want them to have these patterns and to share them with their children. So this is what a pattern would look like. And you can kind of see it in comparison to like how, you know, you can count these stitches and put them on the waist canvas. And this is just the final little slide of us celebrating the finish of the dress, the garden's dress. In old Palestine, I understand from my mother and grandmother that when a dress is finished, there's a party. So whoever gets that dress, whoever that whole group of women were working on the dress for, whether it was her wedding dress or whatever, she would host the party. In this case, we sprinkled hard candies on my mother's head, and we did all of this, and we wore our tie-dye shirts. It was 1995. So, but you know, it was a celebration. This was in our front yard. And you can see how happy my mother is that it's finally done. So about a lot of different stuff. So if there are any questions or anything you want to add, like if you have any, do you have a garden dress? Have you seen the Cleopatra design before? Anything? Yes?
Where would you suggest somebody to start learning? Like, what would be the first step? Somebody who has no experience in embroidery?
Yeah, you could start like a small project. You could take a small design, like the one from the garden dress, that little flower, and you can just start there. And, you know, you could do a lot. I mean, you don't have to just like get my book, but you could get a craft book on embroidery. It doesn't have to be Palestinian specific, just so you can learn the different size of the stitches, the different kinds of materials you can use. And you just kind of got to get started on trying the cross stitch. I think that's the very first step. And you can use like a plastic canvas. Like when we were younger, we started with like a plastic, you know, I'm sure you've seen it's like a plastic kind of thing. And we just used thick yarn and just kind of got used to the cross stitch. Yeah, you can take it out, put it back in. Yes?
I have a question. So like, I'm looking at this garden dress and I'm also looking at Cleopatra design and see there's like gradients, right?
Yeah.
Like how do you go about creating the gradients? Because like, if you go to a craft store, do you actually find that many gradients of colors that you could do that, you know, the levels, you know, like
yeah,
changing, gradual changing of.
It's in the spool.
Uh-huh.
So you don't have to actually get multiple solid colors. You can get the gradient spool. It's called variegated thread. And the technique is that like so when you thread your needle, right, which I can't find the end of this, but if you thread your needle and you cut, you have to cut it, right? You put the knot where you cut. That way you end at where you cut it. And then when you go and start again, you have to make sure that the shade that you ended with, you start with again, because you want to keep the gradient. See, for me, because I was a little bit of an amateur, I did that, but I went too long with this. Like I do like 12 or sometimes I do like 20 stitches, and it'd be like a dark purple, and then I come back and cross them all with like a lighter purple thread. So it's like there is a special technique for it, but it's all within the spool. And I know that just explaining it is probably challenging. I have to show you exactly what it is, but that's how you do it. And I think that's why you oftentimes see it used in smaller areas, like with just one flower, and you kind of like, because it's different threads, you use like a different thread for each one. Yeah.
Thank you so much. That was an incredible presentation. Thank you. I guess growing up, I always used to see my mom and my aunts, like their passion for embroidery, and so I love it. Like I always realized that it was part of our identity, but I think more than it just being of us preserving our culture and keeping it alive, I love how when I visit Palestine now, we notice that all of the NGOs and the nonprofit organizations and stuff are using it as a tool to empower women back home. So many of these NGOs, like these foreign NGOs that go into Palestine, realize that Tatreez is such an important part of Palestinian heritage, but it's also an economic tool of empowerment. So many of them are using it, like are providing women and empowering them through projects on embroidery, and they're selling it outside, they're outsourcing it. And so I just also, I love how it's not just only a part of our culture and our identity, and it's something that we have to preserve in the diaspora, but it's also something that we can use to empower our women that are still home in Palestine and or abroad and living in refugee camps and dispersed all over the world and need it for their just well-being,
Totally.
So I just wanted to share that, and thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. No, I 100% absolutely agree. And I think the spirit of like what I'm trying to say is that like, because in all of my presentations, people will always come and say, can I buy the garden dress? And it's like, no, it's so special. What we want to do is we want to continue like economically empowering others, and then also finding a way to reclaim it ourselves in our own way, not just financially, but in other ways. And so I love that. And actually, there are a lot of nonprofits out there right now, even in the U.S., importing this, Tatreez, handmade Tatreez, just to sell in the United States, which is excellent. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
So you said that the vibrant colors signify celebration and happiness, but I was wondering if when you see a lot of thwab that just have 2 colors, or if there's a predominant color, is there any other symbolic colors or anything else that we can look into? And thank you, that was honestly an amazing presentation.
Very interesting. Thanks. Definitely, that's a great question. And probably one of the most common questions. Yeah, definitely. Different colors do represent different things, and actually you see different colors from different areas. Like you'll see more pinks and yellows from embroidery from Gaza, for instance, or whatever. But in terms of what it means, definitely matters the color of the fabric you use as well. So, one thing I included in the book was kind of like a color guide on different colors and where they came from and kind of what they each mean. For instance, blue represents widow status. So if you find a woman wearing a black dress with blue, only solid blue embroidery, it wouldn't be all these vibrant blues. It'd be just a dark blue or navy blue or something like that. That would indicate that she's a widow, recently widowed. Or it could be just for elderly women, this is the color that they use. But you can also see it in the treatment of the embroidery too. You'll see more washed color, dresses that are maybe damaged or sun damaged, or I don't know, you see kind of washed, oddly colored dresses that have been damaged when someone has recently lost somebody. It's torn, things like that, tears, if there's tears in it, things like that. So you kind of see the occasion of the dress in multiple ways, including the color and the fabric, the kind of design being used, because that's where the story lives, and then also the treatment of the thobe itself.
I have one follow-up question.
Yeah.
What about the velvet fabric? Because I know there's significance there. Do you know the significance of that?
No, I mean, it's hard. I can't speak to that.
Okay.
I don't know if others maybe have more experience with the velvet fabric, but in my family, we don't really use that.
It could be maybe a region thing.
I think there might be, yeah, because you'll also see different kinds of stitches used in different regions, and different kinds of fabric can carry different stitches better. The couching stitch, for instance, that can be carried better on you can put that on silk, or I've seen it on velvet as well. So I don't know, there's a specific texture and technique with the velvet. Maybe that is something I can actually look into because I'm working on the 2nd edition now. So maybe that is actually good feedback that I can talk about in the book. I can research that for you.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have questions? Yeah.
This question may be a little bit abstract, but do you think that maybe the reason, nowadays, cultural appropriation is so rampant, right?
Yeah.
You find some designer and they're just oh, I think that tattoo is really cool, so they'll take an indigenous tattoo and put it on the dress and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Which is why I find this book is so awesome. Is it's giving voice to the stories that I think traditionally have been passed on generation to generation through women, right? And I think this is all the more important to keep this from disappearing, because you're giving voice to these stories, and now they'll be heard in new generations of women and also men and boys and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because when I was talked about this presentation with my friends, they're oh, my husband actually does Tatreez. He does it, and he picked it up from when he was young in Palestine, in Vietnam.
Wow. I love that, and that's actually, I know I have a boy in here, and people always ask me oh, well, how is he? He's probably not going to learn. I was I'm going to teach him how to embroider. Let him make his own decisions, because yeah, I think that this should be, I speak from my maternal side, but I really wish that I could uncover a story where a man in my family shared it, because that would be powerful. I'd be interested in hearing from you a little bit more about that story, because that would really be a dream, because I want this to be more accessible to everybody, not just women and
I
girls.
I can totally put you in touch, because when I'm like spending time with them, like if he's like in the mood to like talk, he'll just talk about all this stuff, like because just like all the men in Palestine, they spend time in Israeli prison, and like it's just the amazing stories I hear from him. You know, how they organize, how they like stage like protests, and how they collected past information through these like really tiny like scraps of paper. It's really amazing.
There is one story in the book. It's the bird's design, and it's actually called like the mother and daughter-in-law, and it has two birds. I'm sure it's a traditional design. I'm sure many people have seen it, with the birds facing one another, and then they're facing away from each other. So there is a story with my great-grandmother actually wanting to connect with her friend from another village, but great-grandmother, imagine they didn't have cars back then. Her husband, my great-grandfather, was riding on horseback to the next village. She was like, you know what, I can't write the story down. She didn't learn how to read or write. She didn't go to school. So she used embroidery. And she didn't want to ask her husband, like, oh, would you ask my friend, like, how's her son doing? Like, are they fighting with their, like, daughter-in-law? She knew he wouldn't go there. So she decided to embroider half of the mother and daughter-in-law, the bird's design, and wanted her friend to finish it. Finish it with either the birds facing each other or facing away, so she just knew, were they fighting? And this is a story, and this is what they did. So this is the only time I've ever seen a man like sort of get involved. And he's like, oh yeah, I'll give her this design. And he like goes and takes it over there, gives it to her. He's like, I don't know, my wife just like me, it's halfway done. And she ended up finishing it over the days that he had stayed there. And then she was like, oh, send this back to her, please, 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 I worked so hard on it. He's like, okay. And so he just like took it back, and immediately my great-grandmother like knew exactly what had happened. It was such a language. There's so much meaning. Yeah. It was.
So were the birds facing each other?
They were facing apart.
They were facing apart. They were facing apart. Which I'm sure like spurred like a whole bunch of questions. I wonder what those designs look like
afterwards.
Yeah, exactly. I did have like one thing I wanted to read that my mother wrote about being Palestinian. It's just like it's a short poem. I don't know if we have time though. What time is it?
It's 9 o'clock.
Is it okay if I read it? I want to do this for my mom because she always began her presentations reading this, and I want to end the presentation with this for her. Okay. So she says, I am Palestinian. I was born in Safad. I was forced to leave my homeland with another million Palestinians. I wandered as a refugee in many Arab countries, and presently I'm an immigrant in the United States. My only identity is my national dress. It is my own work, which I inherited from my ancestors through my mother and my grandmother. I will pass it on to my daughters because this is their real identity. My history is recorded on my dress. I believe in my dress more than I believe in scholars and historians because their books and accounts are easily distorted and biased, but not my dress. Embroidery was created by common people who do not know distortion at all. When I hear songs, they remind me of the story of my people, my nation. Palestinian folklore, like any other folklore, is derived from our joy and sorrow. So the colors are bright in peacetime and pale in our agony. I do not intend to tell history, but significant events that dominated Palestine from the pharaohs to the Israeli occupation. It is captured in our dresses and have impacted our folk art. Through all this time, the woman has had the desire to express her views, to express hatred only towards violence and weapons. She's documented her opinions on violence and war clearly on her dress and in her songs. Even with the tragedy of Al-Nakba of 1948, the women still continue to document the history of Palestine in a song or on a dress to transfer her knowledge to coming generations. Now, folklore has become a part of political life since the political condition shapes the human being, our lives, our land. As we are approaching the end of the 20th century, still politicians believe that violence is the means for imposing peace. Peace has not come because peace cannot be imposed by force, but rather through mutual understanding and respect between people. Human beings, regardless of culture or political creed, share the same basic feelings and views. As women, we were created to love peace and gather our families together. Why do we not proceed to do what we are created to do? Let us renounce aggression, oppression, and violence, and let us stop the killing and dispersion. These are the enemies of human life, and these are the enemies of dignity. I'm here today to tell the story from my heart, because if anyone else were to speak for me, they would not know my feelings. Some people might interpret my story, my very existence as a Palestinian, as an attack. But why would they want another human being to be silent about suffering and keep their story locked inside? Anyone who has suffered knows no good can come from being silent. We are singing today not because we are happy, but because our songs peacefully convey the suffering of our people. Suffering is our legacy as humans, but let peace one day be our legacy, not suffering. I smuggled my dreams and my hidden wishes and crossed the ocean in hope for peace, justice, and equality for all people. That was 1989.